The stage was 2 hours late, and by the time it finally creaked into Cutter's Bend, the horses were gray to the knee with trail dust and nobody in town had bothered to come out and watch it arrive. That should tell you something about this place. Nobody watched anything happen here anymore until that afternoon. My name doesn't matter for this one. What matters is the woman who stepped down off that stage, because everything that happened in Cutter's Bend that autumn happened because of her. And nobody in town saw it coming, least of all the man who hired her. Cutter's Bend wasn't much. A packed dirt street, a general store with a sagging awning, a livery that stank of hay and old leather. A church with a bell that hadn't rung in 3 Sundays, because nobody had gotten around to fixing what was wrong with it. Wyoming Territory, 1887, the kind of town that existed because a stage line needed somewhere to stop between Cheyenne and the mountains, not because anyone had ever meant for people to stay. She came down the iron step with a traveling bag over one arm and a leather notebook pressed against her ribs like she'd been holding it there since Cheyenne. 25, maybe 26. Pale hair pinned back tight. A dark wool dress that had seen a lot of road but not a lot of hard living. You could tell the difference if you knew what to look for. The stage driver set down a single trunk beside her, said something she answered in one word and left without looking back. And there she stood, trunk at her feet. The whole town arranged on either side of her like she was something that had washed up. The woman at the general store came to the doorway. 2 men at the livery went quiet. A little girl pressed her face to the milliner's window and left a smear of breath on the glass. Everybody looked. Nobody moved. She didn't look at any of them. She looked straight down the length of the street, the way you'd take a measurement, and her face didn't show a thing. At the far end of that street stood a workshop, wide, fresh sawdust scattered around the door, and half a roof over the whole thing, new cedar shingles stopping dead where the old ones began. In the doorway stood a man in his mid-30s, with his right arm bound in linen from shoulder to elbow. He watched her the way everyone else was watching her. But when the stage pulled off and the rest of the street stayed frozen, he pushed off the doorframe and crossed the road. Didn't hurry. Walked like a man who'd already made up his mind about something and was just covering the distance to get there. He stopped in front of her trunk, looked at it, looked at her. "I've got a roof that needs finishing," he said. "I know what a roof is," she said. He didn't dress it up any further than that. Told her there'd been a roof, half done, and now it wasn't going to finish itself, not with his shoulder torn the way it was. The doctor in Cheyenne had a word for it, something about a rotator, something torn where the bone met the joint. But what it meant in plain terms was that he could lift, could carry. Could drive a nail at waist height all day long. But the second his arm went up past his shoulder, the pain dropped him to his knees. The freeze would hit by late October. If the roof wasn't closed by then, the shop took water all winter and everything in it with it. Room and board, he told her, the loft above the shop. No wages. She wasn't looking at him while he talked. She was looking past him across the street at the line where the new cedar stopped and the old shingles started, roughly 2/3 up the left slope. She could tell from here the pitch was workable, that whoever laid those new shingles hadn't rushed it, had kept the courses level. She was doing arithmetic that had nothing to do with numbers. "Yes," she said. He picked up one end of her trunk. She picked up the other without being asked. And they carried it across that street together, while the whole town watched from exactly the distance they'd kept since the stage pulled off. And neither one of them so much as glanced at the watching. Here's the thing nobody in Cutter's Bend knew yet, and it's the thing you need to know if you want the rest of this to make any sense at all. She wasn't just some drifter looking for a bed. She'd been raised on a construction site in Bavaria before her family crossed the ocean. Learning joinery and framing at her father's elbow before she was old enough to understand it was strange for a girl to know these things. Her father used to say a building tells you the truth whether you want to hear it or not. You just have to know how to listen. She'd been listening her whole life. And Cutter's Bend, whether it knew it yet or not, was about to get listened to very, very closely. The loft smelled like cedar shavings and old lantern oil. A cot against the north wall, a wash stand, one hook on the beam for hanging clothes, and a small west-facing window that framed the amber light settling over the saloon roofline. She set her notebook on the sill, didn't unpack another thing. Below her, through the plank floor, she heard supper start, the clink of a ladle, a chair scraping back, a child's voice, high and curious, asking something she couldn't quite make out. Then the man's voice, low, a few words, then quiet, then the ordinary sounds of two people eating. She sat on the edge of the cot and listened to the life underneath her the way you listen to weather. Not paying attention exactly, just aware of it, the way your body is always aware of what surrounds it. The girl's voice came again, a little louder. She caught one word clean, up. The child had asked about something up the loft, maybe, or whoever was in it. The man's answer was too quiet to catch. Then nothing for a long while, except the small, ordinary sounds of a meal winding down. She was on the roof before the light had fully come up. Sky still ash-colored, the mountains not yet visible, the street below dead quiet, no smoke, no sound, nothing moving in either direction. She'd pulled her work clothes on in the dark and found the ladder by feel where she'd left it leaning against the eave. She had the chalk line in her hand when the girl showed up. She never heard her coming. 1 second the ground was empty. The next the child was standing at the base of the ladder in her nightgown, bare feet in the dust, looking up with an expression that wasn't startled, just curious. In the way of a kid who's learned that asking is faster than waiting. "What are the numbers for?" the girl called up. She held out the chalk line so the child could see it from below. "To make the line straight," she said. "If the line's not straight, nothing after it is either." The girl thought about that. "Can I come up?" She glanced at the workshop door, still closed, then back down. "Can you climb a ladder?" The girl was already climbing. Nora, that was her name. 7 years old and apparently entirely unaware that heights existed as a concept worth fearing. Arrived at the roofline and crouched down beside her without a flicker of concern for the drop behind. "Third." She looked at the chalk line, then at the finished shingles, then at the bare boards still waiting. "Show me," Nora said, so she showed her. Stretched the line between two nails, let the girl hold one end, walked out the distance to show how a true reference line makes everything after it reliable. Let her snap at once, that quick flat sound of chalk hitting rough wood, and the blue line left behind, dead straight. Nora studied it like it was the most important thing she'd seen all week. "My father does that. Most carpenters do. He didn't do this roof, though." "No," she said, "his shoulder." Nora nodded like this confirmed something she'd already suspected. That was when she noticed him, standing at the corner of the workshop with a coffee cup in one hand, still enough that the shifting light was the only reason she caught him at all. Watching. Not urgently, just watching the way a person looks at something they hadn't expected to see and aren't in any hurry to interrupt, and won't mention again unless somebody asks. Nora snapped the chalk line a second time. He didn't say a word about any of it. Not that night, not the next morning. She'd half expected something, a nod, a comment over supper. Nothing came. He set his plate down, poured his coffee, sat across from his daughter while she talked about the chalk line, and when he looked up, he didn't look at asterisk her. She let it go. That, too, was its own kind of answer, and she'd learned a long time ago how to read the answers people didn't say out loud. If you've ever worked a job where you had to prove yourself twice as hard just to be given half the benefit of the doubt, stick around. Because this town was about to find out exactly what happens when you underestimate the wrong person. By day 12, she'd settled into her sequence, ridge to eave, left side before right, starting each morning at the top course and working down, every row overlapping the one below by a third. Every nail seated at the angle that would hold through a freeze-thaw cycle without splitting. She didn't rush. Rushing was how you got gaps, and gaps were how you got rot. And rot was the conversation you'd be having in 5 years about why you needed a whole new roof instead of just doing the first one right. Her father had taught her that, said it exactly once and never repeated it, which was his way of telling her it was too obvious to need repeating. The carpenter, his name was Silas, though she hadn't heard anyone use it yet, not even his daughter, who called him nothing at all when speaking to him directly. The way kids do when a name feels too formal for the person standing right in front of you. Came out on the 11th morning and watched her from the ground for a while. She was aware of him without turning, set a nail, 2 strikes to seat it, 1 to drive it true, moved to the next. He went back inside without a word. That afternoon she noticed something had changed. He'd stopped making the sound he always made when she was up there working, a brief stillness below, half a second where the rasp of his plane or the rhythm of his saw would catch. Like he was bracing for something. It had happened every single time she drove a nail the first several days. She understood exactly what it meant. He'd watched people work a roof badly before, and he'd been listening for the sound of it going wrong. By the afternoon of day 11, the pauses had stopped. She didn't say anything about that either. Some things you don't need to say out loud. You just notice them and you keep working and you let the work speak for you. At the general store 2 days later, she asked for 80-penny galvanized nails, by name and count, and the woman behind the counter measured her with a long look before going to fetch them. Another woman was browsing bolts of cloth at the far end and kept right on browsing, a little too carefully. She paid, took her nails, and left. The door hadn't fully swung shut behind her when she heard it, not meant to carry but carrying anyway, the way voices do in a small wood-walled building. Works like a man. Quieter, though. She walked back toward the workshop with the sky flattening out at the edges in that particular way that means the temperature's about to drop. And thought about the fact that she'd been called quieter than a man as though that were the insult, and not the compliment it actually was. The rot had been there the whole time. She'd clocked it her second day in town, walking back from the pump with a full bucket, her eyes crossing the loading platform out of pure habit. Not looking for damage exactly, just registering it the way a person fluent in a language catches a grammatical error mid-sentence without meaning to. The outer joist had gone soft at the corner. The decking above it was starting to follow. Somebody had laid a flat stone over the worst of it, the way people cover problems they aren't ready to name, and the stone had sat there long enough to leave a ring of discoloration around its edge. She hadn't said anything, just measured it on a Thursday evening, passing by, not stopping, not crouching, not making a show of it. Eye and stride, the way her father taught her, joist to joist, the degree of sag in the boards. He never trusted a man who needed a tape measure for everything. She was still learning always, but she'd learned enough for this. Sunday came in gray and cold. She was on the platform before first light with 2 lengths of Douglas fir cut the evening before, a pry bar, her hammer, and a sack of joist hanger nails. Nobody had asked her to do this. Nobody was even awake yet to ask. She levered out the rotted section, seated the new timber, nailed the hangers, relayed the decking boards, tight-grained lumber she'd checked at the mill with her own thumbnail for green. She was setting the last board when the door opened. The store owner's wife stood in the frame in her day clothes, a ring of keys in one hand, up early to open the shop, or she'd seen the lantern light, or both. She looked at what had been done and what was being finished. Neither of them said a thing. A bird crossed the eave overhead and was gone before the silence broke. The woman went back inside. She drove the last 3 nails, pulled the pry bar from the rotted wood she'd stacked for burning, and when the door opened again, there was a glass of water set on the new decking. And the woman was gone before she could say thank you. She drank it standing there, looking at the pale, tight, solid wood underneath the glass. That's when things start to shift, because up until now, this town had only seen her hands. What came next, they couldn't unsee. The physician's office sat 1 room above the saddle shop. Nora had pointed it out her second day in town, laying out the whole geography of Cutter's Bend with the authority of a kid who'd lived nowhere else her whole life. She hadn't thought the information would ever matter. Then one gray afternoon, she heard the 2 of them coming back across the street, Silas's boots slower than usual on the boards, Nora's quick step keeping pace beside him. She was up on the roof. She didn't look down, set a shingle, drove the nail, set another. That night at supper, he ate with his right arm held close to his body the whole meal. She'd noticed this before, actually. The way he reached for things without lifting his elbow, the way he turned sideways to take a pan off its hook, and she'd read it as habit rather than limit. Now she watched the way he held his fork and made herself look at the ceiling instead. Nora talked about a stray cat that had taken up under the schoolhouse steps. Nobody mentioned the physician or what months meant against a calendar that was already running out. She counted backward from October in her head. 30 days, give or take. A shoulder like his would need 3 times that to heal right. She didn't say it out loud. Some numbers you just carry. In the morning, she woke to a single careful sound below her, and then silence that wasn't sleep, the specific quiet of a man lying awake and pretending otherwise. She was pulling on her boots when the first hammer strike came. Quiet, one stroke, a pause, another. The rhythm of someone fitting a piece rather than driving it home, working with real attention. She climbed down. One step near the bottom of the loft stairs had been soft for days. She'd learned to favor the outside edge to avoid the give. He was kneeling right at it, a handful of nails in one hand and a block of cedar cut to fit the gap, shimming it level, his right arm angled carefully so his shoulder never had to rise. He didn't look up, set the shim, tapped it once to check for rock, drove the first nail in 2 careful strokes, then the second, stood, tested the step with his full weight. It held without a sound. He picked up his hammer and the spare cedar and walked back into the shop and didn't say a word. She came down the stairs. Her foot found the mended step. Solid, not a fraction of give left in it. If you've ever watched someone say something important without using a single word to say it, that was this. That was exactly this. The cold hit on a Wednesday, 17 degrees lost between noon and supper, frost silvering the grass by morning, the sky gone that low, flat white that means business. She was up on the roof before full light, running her thumb along every seam of the shingles she'd laid the week before. Nothing loose. Good wood fitted right, doesn't move when the cold comes, because the joints were made to hold from the start. She worked through it without stopping, hands cold the way they always were in the mornings, driving nails with both arms kept level, the way she'd watched him manage his own shoulder and found. Honestly, that it was faster this way too. Shorter mallet swings, less wasted motion. Mid-morning, Nora appeared at the base of the ladder with a tin pail and a cloth over the top, calling up that there was food if she wanted it. She climbed down and ate standing at the hitching post, cornbread, a boiled egg, 2 slices of cold ham wrapped in paper. Nora sat on the fence rail nearby, watching openly, the way kids do when they haven't yet learned that watching is supposed to be subtle. The second day of cold was worse, wind now, not fierce but constant, finding every gap in a coat. The east face was the exposed one, and she'd saved it deliberately, wanting the practice of the other 3 sides before she trusted herself there. By the end of that second afternoon, the front finally moved through. 6 shingles left. The final 6, the highest, most visible corner from the main road. She sat with that number for a minute. The cold had cost her 2 days, and the calendar hadn't moved an inch to make up for it. She picked up her mallet and went down for supper without counting again. She'd already counted once. Counting twice doesn't change the answer. Rain came in the night, the slow, patient kind that means a full day, maybe 2, and she lay in the loft listening to the places in the decking that still needed sealing, filing it away. Waiting for gray light in the one small window. No work today. She came down with her notebook under her arm and cleared a space at the end of his workbench. Shavings, 2 stray nails. A spoke shave left with the blade angled up and open to the pages she'd been building out for the past week. Not the roof, the bell bracket at the church. Nobody had asked her to think about it. She'd looked at it once in passing and the look had been enough. Wrought iron bolted into a timber housing that had rotted clean through at the joint where metal met wood. The bell still hung. The bolt still held. But the wood around it moved every time the bell rang, and wood that moves in one season cracks in the next. She was refining the replacement timber dimensions when Sela's came in from the rain, coat dark at the shoulders, hair damp, a length of trim under one arm he'd been storing in the lean-to. He crossed to his own bench, passed behind her once looking for something in a drawer. He stopped. She felt it the way you feel a sound that's suddenly gone quiet, not a presence exactly, an absence of ordinary movement. She didn't close the notebook, didn't look up. Kept her pencil moving along a dimension line on the timber sketch, clean and even, while he stood there for what might have been 3 seconds or 10. Then he reached past her, not over her, beside her, arm extended without a single point of contact, and set the oil lamp from the wall hook onto the bench, closer to where she was working. The light widened across the open pages. He went back to his own bench. The rain kept coming. The lamp burned steady. She turned to the next page and kept drawing. The schoolhouse sat at the north end of the street, set back on packed dirt that turned to mud whenever it rained. She'd clocked the window frames her second week, the gaps between wood and sill, the cracked putty pulling away in long strips. She'd measured them with her eyes long before she ever touched them with her hands. She started before first light on a Wednesday, working by lantern with her own tools until the sky grayed enough to see without it. Pine, wrong wood for a building that took the north wind straight on, but pine was what had been used, and pine was what she had to work with. She cut new stops from scrap left over from the loading platform, 4 separate passes with the block plane before the frame seated without a rattle. The second morning she worked linseed oil into the new wood with a rag cut from an old shirt, letting the grain drink it in slowly before the next coat, the smell of it rising sharp in the cold air. By the time the first children appeared at the far end of the road, she was already packing up her tools. The schoolteacher, Miss Colby, a small woman somewhere in her 40s with a face built for holding conclusions until every last piece of evidence was in, came out before the children reached the door. Looked at the canvas sack over the stranger's shoulder, looked at the frames, pressed her thumb along the nearest joint, pressed the corner, nothing moved. Who authorized this? No one. Miss Colby pressed the frame again in the other direction. The children streamed past, ducking around the 2 women without much interest, chasing the promise of warmth behind the door. Miss Colby's hand came away from the frame. She had a small notebook of her own, attendance, minor infractions, and she'd apparently taken it out of her coat pocket without the other woman even noticing. She looked at it, put it back. Went inside without another word. The cold had settled in and hadn't lifted. Her breath showed in the air on the walk back. 19 days left. She said the number once, out loud, to nobody and let it go. We're getting close to the part of this story where everything either falls apart or comes together. And honestly, by this point, even the town wasn't sure which one it was watching happen. 2 sections of roof left. She'd worked the math that morning, lying in the loft before light, not arithmetic exactly, but sequence the way her father taught her. One thing following the next in the only order that made sense. 2 days of good weather if she was lucky, 3 if the morning frost slowed the cedar's give. By mid-morning, she'd found her rhythm again. The town moved below her the way it always did, the general store opening, the livery coughing to life, a thin white column of smoke rising off the boarding house chimney. She wasn't watching it closely, just aware of it, the way you're aware of a fire burning near you while your hands are busy with something else. At noon, there was a plate waiting on the workshop step, cloth folded neatly over the top, tucked at the corners. Cornbread still warm, a boiled egg. She never learned which house it came from. She ate standing up, looking at the unfinished section of roof. That afternoon, the storekeeper came out as she passed and told her he'd set aside 4 lengths of good cedar, not the standard stock. The tight grain lumber from the back. Figured she might as well have it since he'd been holding on to it, and nobody else in town was likely to know what to do with it. Said it like it was a plain matter of inventory management and nothing more. She thanked him and carried the cedar back herself, 1 length at a time. Sila's was at his bench when she brought in the last piece. He watched her set it down, didn't say anything. She went back out and up the ladder, but she could feel him watching, not the work this time. Watching the way you watch something you've been trying to name for weeks and have finally found the word for. He stood at the workshop door a while afterward, one hand resting on the frame. The plate from the step was gone. The cedar was stacked neat against the wall. Down the street, someone had hung a new shingle on the boarding house, the loose one she'd noticed weeks ago and never mentioned to a soul. Straight and properly set now. He went back to his bench and sat there a long time without picking up a single tool. The last shingle went down at 20 past noon. No moment to mark, really, just the mallet coming down on the nail set, the cedar settling flush, and then nothing left to set. She held the mallet in her lap and looked at the nail head. Even with the surface, not proud, not sunk, even, 41 courses of shingle ran away from her on both sides, ridge to eave, each one overlapping the last by a third. She'd cut the hip returns herself, fit the ridge cap by eye before checking it against the level in her apron pocket. This roof would not leak, not the first winter, not the second, not unless something came down on it that no roof anywhere could have stood against. Below her, Cutter's Bend went about its noon like it always did. The store owner's wife had set a crate outside the front door. 2 men she still didn't know by name stood talking near the livery gate. Smoke rose from the schoolhouse chimney, the stove lit for the first time that season. From up here, she could see the bell bracket she'd remounted in secret weeks ago, sitting quiet and level in its place. She could see the loading platform, the new boards still a shade paler than the old, not yet weathered to match. By spring, they would. Her trunk was still in the loft, still not packed. She'd stood in front of it plenty of mornings, hands at her sides, running the numbers the way she ran every number carefully, without sentiment. The mountain pass would stay open 11 more days. She had enough saved to get as far as Laramie by stage. From Laramie, a person could go in any direction she liked. She hadn't packed the trunk. The wind came up from the south and moved across the finished roof without catching on a single thing. Nothing left to catch. She'd seen to that. She laid both hands flat against the warm cedar on either side of her. The noon sun soaked into the wood. And for one unguarded second, it felt exactly like the warmth of split timber in her father's workshop back in Bavaria. A life she didn't let herself think about too directly anymore. She heard the workshop door open below, heard boots on the ladder rungs not hurried. That same unhurried wait she'd learned to recognize over 41 days, the sound of a man who never moved faster than a situation actually required. She didn't turn around. He came up over the eave and crossed to where she sat, the ridge at her back, the town beginning to soften and blur below in the early dusk. He was carrying 2 cups. Tin, the same pair from the workshop shelf, the ones Nora had stopped asking about weeks ago, because by now she already knew exactly where they lived. He lowered himself down beside her without a word, set 1 cup on the cedar between them. She picked it up with both hands, still hot enough to feel straight through the tin. She looked out over Cutter's Bend, settling into evening the way it always did, the general store going dark first, then the livery. Then the yellow squares of house windows lighting up one at a time along the north side of the street. He drank from his own cup. Somewhere below, Nora's voice rose briefly in the yard, then the workshop door, then quiet. The trunk was still up in the loft. The notebook still sat on the crate beside it. And she understood, sitting there, that she'd known this for a while now. The way you know a joint is true before you've even checked it against the square, because what you're feeling isn't hope. It's recognition. She was not going to pack that trunk. The first star came out over the eastern ridge, then a second. She'd watched this same ridge 41 evenings running and knew the order the stars always came in, the ridge first, then the low cluster above the pass, then the whole sky at once. When the light finally let go completely, she was ready for it. He was still beside her. His shoulder sat 6 inches from hers. Neither one of them moved, and the roof underneath them held them both without a single fraction of give. Cedar, cut nails, 41 days of honest work. As solid as anything she'd ever built with her own 2 hands. The sky came in all at once, the way it does out there, vast, cold, endless. She let out a slow breath, both hands still wrapped around the warm tin cup, and 11 days before the first hard freeze of the year, she did not reach for her traveling bag. The stars kept coming one after another, and she stayed right where she was to watch every single one of them arrive. So, that's the story. A woman who showed up in a town that had already decided who she was before she said a single word, and who ended up rebuilding half of it without anyone ever quite asking her to. One honest joint at a time. If you'd been standing on that platform the day the stage pulled in, would you have crossed the street to hire her? Or would you have stood back with everybody else and just watched? Let me know down in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight. And if this one got you, hit like, subscribe if you're new here, and I'll see you in the next one.